Once again, this is the final webinar in our 4-part series on the ethnic marketing of lamb and mutton. These webinars have been sponsored by ASI's Let's Grow program as a method of helping producers expand their operations so that the industry can rebuild infrastructure. The support came through our state associations. Again, just to go over each of the links on the slide that you see in front of you. The first link is to the homework assignments. There's 6 of them. Each homework assignment pertains to a particular webinar. There are a lot of links that pertain to ethnic marketing that are not only useful but can help you complete the homework assignments. The second link is a link to the recordings of the webinars. The first 3 are already there. There's also links to each of the PowerPoint presentations, and tonight's webinar is being recorded and will be minimally edited and made public for viewing. So you don't need a specific URL to find these webinars. Just go to www.sheepandgoat.com/recordings.html and you will find them. The third one is a new link that I've added. The American Lamb Board is doing a survey on the direct marketing of lamb. They're trying to quantify the market and in a lot of ways trying to find out what they can do to help facilitate this market. The direct marketing of lamb, or non-traditional markets in general, account for almost 50% of our industry. The direct marketing of lamb, I think, is about 27% of our market. The ethnic markets are included in both the direct marketing as well as sale barns, slaughterhouses, and that sort of thing. So I would encourage you to fill out this survey. Share the link with other producers as well. The more people that fill this survey out, the better we'll be able to quantify the size and the importance of the direct as well as the ethnic marketing of lamb and mutton. Tonight's presentation is developing a production and marketing plan. Our speaker is Dr. Richard Ehrhardt. Richard is a small ruminant specialist at Michigan State University. He was previously in New York at Cornell. He came highly recommended, has a lot of experience with the ethnic markets while he was in New York. I'll ask him to tell a little bit more about himself. I'm going to switch to his presentation, which will take just a moment or two. I'm going to give him mic privileges, so if you'll wait just a second. And Richard, you should be able to talk now, and I will mute myself.
My name is Richard Ehrhardt. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you tonight. As Susan said, I am the sheep and goat specialist, a small ruminant specialist at Michigan State University. And yeah, I've had a reasonable amount of experience both now as a specialist and as a producer with different sheep markets. I originally came from the Midwest, but I spent about 15 years in central New York, where I started a farm, and I worked also at Cornell University, and I have a lot of experience working in that market structure there. And then about 5 years ago, I was hired by Michigan State, so I've also had a chance to see, the ethnic marketing scheme that exists in this state, which is significant as well. So I'm going to speak from that collective experience. Trying to figure out how, Susan, perhaps you can tell me, if you will, how to keep the microphone on without having to hold my finger down. Okay, I think I finally figured it out. Great. All right, moving on. Sorry for the technical glitch there. Everything's going great. So as a matter of topics, tonight I'm going to talk, first of all, about optimizing breeding, feeding, and management systems for some specific ethnic markets. And really, there are many ethnic markets and micro niche markets within this, so I'm going to talk really just about 2. And then the second point is I'm going to talk about estimating cost of production and evaluating market options as well. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. Yeah, one of the nice experiences I have each spring, I teach a production medicine class in the veterinary school to students in their 3rd and 4th year. And one of the things we get to do, that I like to do, to educate them about the sheep industry, because they kind of need a quick crash course really on the industry before they learn about production medicine, is take the students down to Dearborn, where there's a lot of lamb consumers. There's a huge Muslim community. And we visit Mr. Ronnie Berry here, who has a meat shop right in the heart of Dearborn. And the students actually, before we go and visit Ronnie at his shop, we actually get to see Ronnie at the public market on the first day of the course. And the students interact with him and learn exactly the kind of lambs that he's looking for, you know, a specific Lebanese customer making a unique mutton-based dish versus, you know, the more common trade he has of, you know, 80, 90, 100-pound lambs that he sells across his counter. So we get to see what all those lambs look like live, and then 4 days later we come back to his shop and we get to see them hanging. And you show the next slide, Susan, we also get an appreciation of his customer base. So we get to see what really is very similar to what you would have seen probably in pre-1970s America, where he really is just very similar to, you know, the home butcher, where we have very direct connection with the customer. The customers come in with their families. Ronnie gets a very keen sense of what they're looking for in terms of both quality and what kind of value they're looking for. And anyhow, it provides really immediate feedback, and it gives you a really good insight into the type of lamb that's being in demand by these different markets. So it's always a really rich experience to go there. And I think it's one of the neat things about the ethnic market is having that immediate connection between the consumer and the person marketing the meat. Okay. So just I'd like to go, as a bit of an aside, I'd like to kind of compare and contrast these markets to give you a sense of the diversity in these two distinct market regions. Now, my experience with the Metro New York City lamb market, there's, you know, several aspects of it, but just as a representative, we have a milk-fed lamb market that Susan's referred to quite a bit, sometimes called the hothouse lamb market. Within that market, there really are two distinct ethnicities that will buy these milk-fed lambs. These would include Italians and Greeks. Italian market meaning demanding a slightly smaller lamb, and the Greek market a little bit larger lamb. These are mostly, most of these lambs are consumed around Easter and again at Christmas, particularly in the Italian market. There's more of a Christmas market, less of a Christmas market for the Greek lambs. So those are peak demand points. There is, as a general statement, low demand otherwise. Then there's also the Muslim, or I'll call halal lamb. These are moderate weight lambs. I would say, particularly in Metro NYC, they want a leaner product, but lean doesn't mean skinny. It means more of an even fat cover, not overly fat. I'll describe that a little bit later. There's peak demand right after the breaking of the fast, Eid al-Fitr, or at the during the festival of sacrifice that follows a few weeks later, which would be Eid al-Adha. But there's, of course, as many of you know, decent demand year-round. So this is a real key market that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at the ethnic market trade. What I also found working in Metro New York City market is that there is another market, another segment that I worked with a number of other producers. We had a cooperative marketing scheme with the large producers. I had about 300 ewes on an accelerated lambing program. I was the smallest member of our marketing scheme. We had 5 farms. And what we did there is we marketed to what would be called the Greek restaurant trade. These lambs were consistently desired to be less than 80 pounds. They had to be of a size that would fit essentially on a spit, because most of these lambs were spit roasted. You need to have sufficient fat, so they need to be fatter than typically you'd see for the Muslim trade. There was good demand throughout the year, but highest during outdoor cooking weather. So that was another kind of micro piece of that market. And as in general, there were a lot of farm gate sales, very little farmer to retail sales in that market. Many lands were sold directly to wholesalers, which Susan described as middlemen, which, you know, we'll just use either term here, wholesalers, middlemen. And they typically distributed to small retailers. There were also some of these wholesalers, these middlemen, and some of these retailers that bought directly from the public markets. New Holland would be one of the big ones, but there were several other public markets involved. Now, Metro Detroit, which principally would be Dearborn, has many similarities, but also some differences, as I've come to know over the last 4 or 5 years. There is also a demand for milk-fed lamb there. Really the exact same specifications, the smaller lambs for Italian market, slightly larger lambs for the Greek market. Same demand cycle, exactly the same. However, there just isn't as much of a market. So because of that, we typically don't see the same competition, and there's lower prices. It's still, like all of these markets, worth investigating, talking to a buyer agent, asking about these markets. So we still do that, but we often find, and I'll go through an exercise later, that these prices offered in some of these opportunities aren't sufficiently high enough to justify entering these markets. I'll talk about that later. There's also the Muslim/halal lamb and Greek restaurant trade as well, but in Metro Detroit, those are really mixed together, and here they're typically called light fat lambs. So it's hard to distinguish between those two in this particular area of the country. And they're a little bit larger lambs that fit that category than you'd find in New York City. For various reasons, we see a little bit larger lambs marketed to this particular trade. They want a finished lamb with uniform fat cover. There's less emphasis, I'd say, on lean lamb, however. Again, in Metro Detroit market, there are, however, a lot of farm gate sales, probably more so even than I saw in New York City. A lot of farmers sell directly to the ethnic market. There's really no farm to wholesale. We just don't have the type of middlemen that I was really familiar with in the East Coast. But there's lots of lambs sold to both wholesalers and retailers at the public market. So most of these lambs are sold through the public market, very little to middlemen in this market. So there's a different marketing dynamic altogether, okay? So just a few more general statements, and I'll get more specific. As you have learned from Susan and Catherine, ethnic markets are diverse. Each one has a unique dynamic. They vary a lot in what I'm going to call the degree of specification, as how specific the meat standards are, and also in the dynamic of demand, their demand cycle. So in some of them, you'll see demand is really consistent, like in this Muslim market, relatively consistent, and product specifications are a little less rigid. However, in the hothouse lambs, as you'll see in a minute, the demand is relatively short-lived and very intense, and very specific requirements, at least for quality and for the high prices, I think Susan's alluded to in our last webinar. Again, the demand and specifications of various groups can be complementary. This is something I'll illustrate with a couple examples at the end of my talk. So if you have a production system that can meet both of these markets, it can be a really strong marketing strategy. So I'll describe how that can work as we move along. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to start off speaking about the milk-fed lamb market. 2 words, I'd say it's intense and short-lived. Question is, how big is this market? I guess my impression was it wasn't that big of a market, but I was in Western New York just a couple of weeks ago with one of the producers I work with there, who's got over 2,500 ewes, and we were kind of debating that. I think there is significant demand for these high-end lambs in particular, and maybe an opportunity to slightly grow that market, but it is difficult to know how big this market is. A couple dynamics are important to understand. In that the timing of both the Western and Orthodox Easter holidays do affect marketing dynamics. What we've come to learn is that the price is always lower because of basically higher risk for these meat shops when these holidays are on the same day. Again, these markets are a little bit different. The Italian market, which is more of the Western market, will demand a slightly smaller lamb, where the Orthodox market, the Greek market, will demand a larger lamb. When they're on the same day, these buyers are kind of afraid to overspend, and typically we don't see the same price. However, the best scenario has always been for sustained demand and profit is when Greek follows Western Easter, where you're able to sell these slightly smaller lambs early, you can hold some of the other lambs a few extra weeks, and there's less risk involved. So that's always a good scenario. And you can look at the ethnic marketing calendar, which I believe Susan has on her website and has maintained that information really nicely. That'll tell you how they vary from year to year. So in general, premiums are going to be paid, and there are true premiums for finished, muscular, and high-yielding lambs. High-yielding means in terms of carcass, so these would be fatter lambs. And these aren't super fat lambs, of course, because they're just little young lambs that are basically less than 70 days of age, but they are higher-yielding lambs, so they do have adequate fat content, and that's a trick, trying to get adequate finishing in a small lamb, and I'll describe how that's done as we move along. So I'd say, as a general statement, it's best suited for accelerated production schemes. These are schemes that have production cycles of less than 12 months because the cost of production is probably too high for annual lambing systems. I'll go through a scenario where we can look at that. Now, the decision to participate in this market should include evaluation of the profit of selling the same lambs later at heavier weights. So you always need to consider that. So you need to look at what the prices are for this market and then consider your opportunity to sell them later. And that should be an important consideration in choosing to enter this market. An advantage is that there are no lamb feeding facilities needed. Facilities can be optimized for lambing and nursing moms and their babies. So that's one of the advantages of this system, is it can maybe make better use of your facilities, especially if you have expensive facilities, because you can have a quick turnaround. You don't have to have specialized facilities also for raising lambs, so you can optimize your buildings just to kick out a lot of lambs all the time. Next slide, please. So just briefly, accelerated production systems, there's several variants. Basically, here's one which would be an 8-month system, I'll call it, which is essentially 3 lambing periods in 2 years. This allows distribution of lamb throughout the year and a more efficient system in terms of reducing maintenance feeding costs, because the ewes aren't loafing for 3 months of the year eating a maintenance diet. The STAR system is another system developed at Cornell University. It has 5 lambing periods in 3 years. If you divide 5 into 36, you get 7.2 month intervals, so it's a little bit shorter interval, gives you a little bit potential for higher productivity. Next slide. And what this allows, this distribution throughout the year of more even distribution of lamb production, is to really build any market, whether it be a traditional or an ethnic market, because as you see in this diagram, you basically have market-ready lambs available year-round. We can twist this or move this scheme a little bit, shift it back and forth, and set it up so that you can really optimize, for example, marketing of white lambs at Easter and white lambs again at Christmas. So there are ways of tweaking this system. We have ways of using this system also to hit the Muslim market as well, which is constantly changing in time according to the lunar calendar. Okay, next slide, please. Here's just an example of one of these farms. This farm actually is in Quebec, Canada. This is an accelerated scheme. They actually use lights, not hormones, to ensure that their sheep breed year-round and have lots of babies. They have almost 4 lambs per ewe per year in this particular system. As you can see, hopefully just looking at these sheep, they're in very good body condition. These ewes are in late gestation. You won't really see a very skinny sheep in this whole farm because they have very high disease status and a very high level of feeding. They feed at total mixed ration. And this was a dairy farmer who got involved with sheep and feeds his sheep very well and has a very efficient system. Next slide, please. Here is another really good farm I just visited in Western New York. The Kyle Farm, located just south of Rochester. They're probably one of the larger farms in the U.S., 2,500 ewes and still expanding. As you can see in the lower right corner, they feed a TMR, corn silage, haylage, small amount of grain, mostly just really good forages, very little grain. You can see these lambs, this was right before Thanksgiving. These lambs are born in September. There's a whole lot of 60, 70-pound lambs at 60 days of age, and this 50, 60 days of age, these are like perfect hothouse lambs. There's 1,200 ewes lambing in this cycle, probably over 2,000 lambs. If you want to see some really beautiful hothouse lambs, this would be the place to go. Next slide. So the specifications are, we want young lambs. So these are lambs that are essentially sold right off their mothers. These young lambs are going to have a very light meat color. They're going to be well finished. And in order to hit that spec, you need fast growth. Fast growing lambs will always deposit more fat and have a relatively less lean body composition. So just as a rule of thumb, you pretty much are going to have your lambs gaining more than 0.6 pounds per day. And that can be a little tricky when you have highly prolific sheep with triplets. It's possible to do it though with very good high plane of nutrition for the moms and creep feeding for the babies. So that's kind of a marketing target to have that high rate of gain, and that allows a highly finished lamb. So you have this real premium hothouse lamb. The genetics for this system, I'm going to speak a bit general here, but as far as maternal genetics, you're going to want them to be both, of course, aseasonal, which is very important, and prolific. And we also want them to have some meat quality, hopefully. We want modest frame size, so this might be ewes that are less than 170 pounds. We also want to have some muscle. Sheep that fit this scheme pretty well, particularly hybrid sheep. Crosses of all these sheep seem to work really well. It'd be the Finn, Dorset, Ile-de-France, Romanov. I didn't include Polypay in there, but they would also fit to a degree, although they tend to be maybe a little too framey for some of the hothouse lamb market. Used in moderate amounts, they can work. Rams, they work. The best rams would be ones of modest frame size, again, that have an early growth pattern. I'll describe that in a minute. They're heavy muscled. Also, they have to be aseasonal, so they have to be able to breed in the spring if you're going to hit the fall lamb market. Breeds that fit this would be Ile-de-France, Dorset, and Texel. I put the South down as a question mark because they're not very aseasonal and they're not nearly as muscular as they were 30 years ago. So I'm going to kind of downgrade them for this talk. Management, in general terms, you would like to see 7 to 9 month birth intervals to hit both of these markets. Again, you need a high plane of maternal nutrition, indoor rearing of lambs with access to creep feed, as you saw in those pictures. The males don't need to be castrated. In fact, it would be a problem, not a problem to do that. It would just be really slow down their growth. These lambs are sold very young, so there's absolutely no secondary sex characteristics that end up causing any meat quality issues. Again, they're sold directly off moms. They're not weaned. Another important consideration is you kind of need to be close to your slaughterhouse to really hit the premium market. These lambs really shrink and lose quality very quickly. I used to hit this market a lot when I was in New York State, and my slaughterhouse was only 30 miles away. And the middleman that I worked with, it was really important for him to make sure he had these really fresh lambs that hadn't shrunk hardly at all to really have the highest quality. Next slide, please. Here's just a picture of some of these lambs close up. You see they have tight hides. These lambs are probably in this picture about 45 days old. They'd already hit the mid 30 to 45 pound range. You can see just by looking at them, they're muscular, they have a fair bit of fat cover, and importantly, to make money, hopefully there's a lot of them to sell, a lot of lambs for you. So prolificacy is also important. So you need to kind of balance all these traits to really do well in this market. Next slide. Here's just another picture of these lambs. I believe are going to Greek Easter, which I can see by the color of the grass there, is a little bit later, probably late April, early May that year. And these lambs are going to be 55 to 60 pounds in weight. And you can see they're also very muscular. Maybe not quite as high quality as the last lamb just seen, but also very good lambs. Okay. I talked about early growth, and what I mean by that is maybe you can be illustrated here a bit better. When we look at growth, I have a group of Suffolk sired lambs and then a group of Ile-de-France sired lambs plotted against mature size. These Ile-de-France sheep, just as an example, are a continental breed. They're very muscular and exhibit early growth. And they reach mature size earlier in their growth. So they're early growing sheep, therefore they have relatively more fat at a given body weight, and that makes them more ideal for this kind of market. Not only are they muscular, but they're early maturing, and that's important. I mean, Suffolks are very, very good terminal sires for other purposes, but maybe not as good for this market, particularly the Italian and less than 50-pound lamb market. They're just a little too framey and a little too lean at that age. Okay, here's just a picture of some of these lambs. These look like a little bit larger lambs, like probably carcass weights are probably close to 30 pounds here. These would be 60-pound Greek Eastern lambs. You can see they're very muscular, and they have a fair bit of fat cover for lambs at this age. And again, these lambs are going to not be over 60 days of age. So they're very young and muscular, and they have fat cover. So they're kind of these premium lambs that they're looking for in this market. Okay. Again, here's some work that I did research-wise when I was at Cornell. Just illustrates how you can see we basically have lambs killed at different body weights. These would be pretty much fitting the hothouse market, especially the 45-pound lambs, which you see on the bottom axis. You see that these lambs were either fed to grow very quickly or fed a more limited plane of nutrition. So they were all fed artificially, but these lambs are fed very well to lots of milk in unlimited access in the high plane of nutrition, gaining 0.74 pounds per day, which is pretty exceptional for milk-fed lambs. And that would be very similar to those target growth rates I was telling you about. And these lambs are quite a bit fatter at the same body weight than those grown at the lower growth rate. So that just kind of illustrates my point there. Okay, so next I'm going to speak a bit more in generalities regarding the Muslim or slash halal market. Again, this is a large market in many regions. However, I'd say in general, I think it's a safe statement to say that there's really been a low marketing and promotion effort put forth by both the industry and by farmers. This market just kind of exists, but I don't think we've really done much to promote and really expand this market. We've just kind of, you know, it's there, but we haven't really done much to cater to it, I would say. There's consistent demand with clear peaks, as I discussed, with the festival of sacrifice and the breaking of the feast. I just lost my screen. Okay, sorry, back again. Marketing standards do vary. And what I would say is that the quality standards really are fairly ill-defined, but I'll try to give you some target here based on my experience. And it's kind of a general statement, but they want uniform fat cover, but not too much. What does that mean? These are probably yield grades less than 3, certainly, probably in the low 2 range. These would be lambs, I'd say, that have less than 2 inches of subcutaneous fat over the 12th rib. So these are relatively lean, but not skinny lambs that have a nice uniform fat cover. I'd say there's an inconsistent premium for quality. That's one of the sometimes frustrations. You can produce really high quality lambs and you don't always feel like you're going to get paid a big premium for them in this market. However, smaller carcasses are desired again compared to the traditional market. I think most of you know that. In fact, in New York, these carcasses would be closer to less than 40 pounds. I've noticed here in the Midwest, we have kind of a hybrid market where we do have a lot of traditional lambs sold. That seems to influence the Muslim market, making it. We see larger lambs being sold into the Muslim Arab market. Premiums are sometimes paid for intact males and what might be considered unblemished animals. Those are animals that don't have like torn ears, for example, or any kind of injuries, particularly for the ritual slaughter at probably the festival for sacrifice or certain other periods. Demand for quality mature animals also exists. Okay, so mutton is also an important part of the Muslim market. Ronnie Berry always buys lambs, ewes, for example, that are kind of 2 or 3 year old ewes that have some body fat but aren't overly fat. And he's pretty specific in his sourcing of mutton. He's going to pay a premium for those. Often he doesn't really have to. There's not a lot of competition there, but there is demand for those animals. So the quality standards, I'd say in general, because there isn't a need to have quite as much finishing, these can be met with a lower energy diet, met with a lower cost of production system that's grazing or forage based. It can be a lower input system and hopefully a low cost production system as well. What I've been observing, I think it's a safe thing to say, is that my marketing experience suggests that this market may be trending towards demand for larger lambs, particularly here in the Midwest. We used to think that more of a 40-pound carcass would be a standard, but I see it increasing. It's helpful to some producers who are direct marketing because they're able to make just a little bit more money on these lambs, selling them at a slightly higher weight, typically at the same price. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what is the target carcass for the Muslim market? That's, again, an important question. If you were to go to the Middle East, which I've had the opportunity to do, you'll see that really the lambs that are preferred there don't look anything like our sheep. They're fat-tailed sheep. Here's an extreme version in the upper left. This is a Hamadani sheep. This animal has an immense fat tail. It's to the point where it can barely function. The idea with a fat-tailed sheep is that they typically have less seam fat. You can see that in the lower left. They can actually remove that fat tail and sell that as fat to be rendered for cooking, for example. You can see here on the right, when I was in Iraq 2.5 years ago now for a program, I got a chance to go to one of their upscale supermarkets in Erbil, which is in Kurdistan, and you would see all types of lamb being offered in the market. And the primo lamb in that particular day was this leg of lamb here on the right. You can see distinctly shown attached to that leg of lamb is a testicle, indicating that that is an intact male lamb, which would have sold for a premium price in that particular market at that time. So, genetics and management for the Muslim market. Well, as far as maternal lines, I'll make some general statements. We don't need a really big ewe to do this. I think that should be clear because the target carcasses are not as large as the traditional market, which seem to promote lambs greater than even 130 pounds. So 170-pound ewe is probably even big, plenty big for this market. Just like any production system, we need to make sure that we're going to make money, so they need to be prolific, relatively prolific, and fit within a resource base for a given farm. And if it's a grazing-based program, I'd argue it would be important to have some parasite resistance or some effort to select for that. We see that animals vary quite a lot in their genetics for parasite resistance, so that's another important profile. There are many breed possibilities. Hair sheep certainly fit this profile. hair sheep aren't all parasite resistant. However, there are genetics, especially the West African genetics, that are more resistant within the hair sheep realm that give them maybe a little advantage. I'm sure there's I know there's resistant genes in wool sheep as well, but I would say that overall parasite resistance could be an important part of this maternal line, especially in a pasture-based system. As far as sire lines go, just like other systems, there are efficiencies to be gained by the use of larger, mature-sized terminal sires that have these moderate-sized ewes. Larger terminal sires are going to get an increase in efficiency. We're going to have a lower overhead cost of maintaining a flock because we have smaller production units, smaller ewes, collectively smaller feed bill. But using these larger, mature-sized rams, we'll get some growth and additional growth. The leaner standards, I would argue, will favor these large terminal sires. However, with these smaller ewes, we have to be a bit concerned, especially in a pasture-based system, because there has been shown, as I'll show you later, that some of this high growth that you might get with these really large terminal sires might be offset by a higher mortality that you might see in offspring. So you need kind of a balance. We do need a terminal sire system for optimal efficiency, maybe not quite the same extreme size as you see in the traditional lamb market, particularly in a pasture-based system. As far as management goes, lambs again can pre-fed on a lower cost feeding system with zero or limited grain feeding. There's nothing wrong with feeding them grain. It's just and it may be very efficient in your system to do that, but because there's a leaner end market, you don't need to have quite the same higher energy diet, so we can really focus on low cost of production schemes, because these slower growing leaner carcasses really fit the market specs well. However, I would say don't get the idea that you don't have to do a good management job, because in this system, sometimes I hear that, oh, I'm just going to raise some hair sheep because they're parasite resistant, turn them out in a field, and hit this, Arab Muslim market because it's not that specific and easy to hit. Well, you need good management to negate the pasture system limitations, which are higher predation risk, lower energy feeds, and parasitism. So if you ignore those issues, you're going to have problems with the system. And it does require some management skill to do really well, just like, for example, this accelerated system, higher input system I described earlier. Okay. Here's an example of how to go about choosing an ideal size ram and ewe. This is just a chart put together by Dave Thomas based on some work in the literature, where you see on the top a sire breed mature weight, excuse me, and that would be the weight of the ewes of that breed. So they give you some specs on the bottom of the maternal size of typical sire breeds, and then on the left, the left axis, if you will, of this table, you'll see the vertical axis. You'll see ewe breed in mature weight, and you can see, and I can't really show you with a cursor here, but if you look in the lower right quadrant, if you will, or section, you'll see that, pretty much ewes with less than 170 pounds, that are less than 170 pounds, are going to have lambs that fit the right profile for this market, which is going to be typically less than 100 pounds. So we don't need very large sheep to fit this particular Muslim market. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and I mentioned a little bit about terminal sires. Now, in this particular case, using a larger framed, relatively lean terminal sire might be a good move, although I think even these continental breeds like Ile-de-France would work fine too, particularly in a pasture-based system. But you're going to have faster growth and a relatively lean carcass, which all fit the specifications of the Muslim trade. Next slide. And again, efficient systems that use these terminal sires, go back once. Back a slide, please. Thank you. Are going to also need maternal sires to produce replacement ewes. And here's just a couple examples of what I call good matches for a system like this. We have some polyphase sheep on the left that are being selected for estimated breeding values for fecal egg count, and on the right, the same thing. There's some Katahdin sheep. I think these are from Kathy Bielick in Ohio, very nice sheep that are also being selected and have high estimated breeding values for parasite resistance. Next slide, please. Okay, what I described before is that maybe it's not a great idea to have super huge mature size terminal sires. This is kind of supported by this work here, where as we look on the x-axis, we have 216-day weight corrected for lamb survival. So this tells you which of these were rams. This is all work done at Clay Center by compiled by Craig Liemaster. It's a number of studies that they did over the year looking at the relationship of litter weight. So this is the total mass of lambs weaned under different, out of the same ewes and bred to different rams, so that you can see that they got the largest mass from Texel and Dorset sires, which are terminal sires, but not super huge terminal sires, whereas the Suffolk sires also were better than the maternal line. The maternal line in this case, I believe, was either Katahdin or white Dorper Katahdin type cross ewes. They're relatively smaller ewes. So anything larger than the Katahdin and Dorper here would be a larger mature size. So Romanoff and Finns were even larger. And Suffolks, the problem with the Suffolks was that they hadn't tended to have, even though they were the fastest growing lambs, more of them died. So collectively, the Dorset and Finn sires worked better in this system because of the higher mortality offsetting growth with the Suffolks. Okay. Here's just a slide of some work I've done here in Michigan looking at alternative forages. For this type of trade, these alternative forages, here's a grazing radish called graza. My son there holding that otherworldly looking radish in the left panel. These things grow super fast in the fall, and they really fit very nicely into a complementary forage system to finish lambs for this type of trade. They're very high energy crop, and you can see here's a group of lambs in the upper right panel grazing that particular forage. This isn't exactly a magic crop. Turnips, other types of plants in the Brassica family fit this profile really well, just as well. But you can see that these lambs here have spent their entire life on grass. They were born on grass, raised on grass, and they're being sort of finished, if you will, on Brassicas. And these are lambs, probably 90 to 100 pound lambs that are getting close to that 0.2 inches of back fat, and they fit really nicely into that muslin market with very little, with very low cost of production. Okay, just an example here. Here's just a comparison of lambs grazing Brassicas within the same group of animals to those put directly on a grain diet at weaning. So post-weaning gains on Brassica diet weren't as good as the grain, obviously. They're still reasonably okay. Intakes were higher on the Brassica. Feed to gain was much higher on the Brassica because it's a lower energy than grain. However, if we looked at the cost of gain, we could get at least 500 to 600 pounds of gain per acre on these crops, so it's pretty impressive. Cost of gain is less than half of that of grain, so this provides a low-cost system. And also, these Brassicas can be used as part of a pasture renovation scheme, and so you can take your pastures that aren't real productive, kill them in the middle of summer, plant these Brassicas, have this super high-quality feed that's low in parasite infectivity, and use them to almost pretty much finish lambs, particularly for the muslin trade. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's the cost of production for these schemes? That's pretty important stuff. Now, the true cost of production these calculations are really achieved via a process. It's a real process to get to them. It requires refinement and adjustment, and it's, I would say, a laudatory goal. It's something we should be shooting for. It's hard for me to, I often get stuck giving people cost of production, but we have to start on it. So I'll use estimates to get the ball rolling, and we continually refine from there. The major cost of production, just in a really summary way, would be feed, facilities, and labor. And there's some good calculators out there. The one that I like to use is the one from ALMAFRA, the Ontario kind of extension wing of agriculture. They do a really nice job with their sheep work, and they have a good calculator that you might want to check out. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some partial budget estimates for 3 scenarios. I'm going to describe a hothouse annual system, which you'll see is not a very profitable system, a Muslim annual system, and then a kind of a hybrid system where you have an accelerated production scheme that sells both to hothouse when it's available and to the Muslim market at other times of the year. So it's kind of a composite marketing scheme. Now, the first line is the farm feed. That's the entire amount of feed that the cost of that feed per ewe per year. You can see that in the annual lambing scheme for the Muslim market, we can have pretty much a grass-based system. We might only have $100 as an estimate here. The hothouse annual system is going to be higher. One of the things to use as a kind of benchmark is that most of these sheep are going to eat close to a ton of forage a year. So a ton of forage, you can help use that to price your annual costs, whether it's grazing or fed forage. It's going to make a big difference. In this Muslim scheme, we have a lower cost of production than the hothouse accelerated scheme, with the hothouse annual scheme being intermediate. Then as far as facility costs, I would argue that you really hardly need a facility for this Muslim market, whereas the hothouse market, you would need winter lambing or cold lambing facilities, which are very expensive. For the hothouse, the accelerated scheme, you'd also need winter lambing facilities and possibly some feeding facilities as well. So that's going to be a slightly higher facility cost. Again, this is all kind of a scenario here, so you can shoot me down on a lot of these numbers, but I'm using it kind of as a means of conversation to look at production costs. Labor, in terms of cost per ewe per year, they've done some labor studies at Cornell and also in Ontario that suggest, takes a couple hours of labor per ewe per year, minimally. So it depends how you value your labor, but for the annual system, pasture-based, you're going to have lower labor, certainly, than a hothouse system with indoor lambing in the middle of winter. The accelerated system is going to have higher labor than both of them combined, but not going to be twice as much as the annual system, certainly, because they use only lamb 1.5 times a year. So the total cost per ewe per year, you can see, of course, the accelerated system is the most expensive, with the Muslim market annual marketing system being the least. So as far as price per lamb, for the hothouse lambs, a pretty darn good price would be $110 per lamb. For the Muslim market, I just chose a price of $144 for these lambs. And because we're selling both hothouse and Arab trade lambs in the accelerated scheme, I have a price that's a little bit closer to the higher price, because what we find is in accelerated schemes we can often find larger prices because we're able to market year-round and hit some of these higher-end markets. So it's a slightly higher price there, and that's realistic based on my experience. Lamb sold per ewe per year, of course, is going to be higher in the accelerated scheme, perhaps a little bit lower in the annual scheme on pasture, because perhaps we have a little greater mortality loss on pasture than we would in a tightly controlled indoor system. Anyhow, the revenues per ewe per year, you can see, are quite a bit higher for the accelerated system. We look at the returns on feed and labor. We see in this particular scenario very competitive. The accelerated scheme to this annual scheme, whereas this hothouse program doing annual production is really not a money maker. And I guess that's the real take home here, is that I really think that if you're going to do this scheme and you think this is a great opportunity for you, you need to think about lowering your cost of production, increasing your production by doing the accelerated production system. Okay. Next slide, please. So here's a lamb return scenario that I did for myself actually just a few weeks ago. I was trying to figure out whether I should be selling hothouse lambs or selling lambs, the same lambs, to a larger lamb market. In my particular case, in my own farm, I still have about 150 ewes. I can hit either market and get pretty good prices. So what I did here, I'll just kind of go through it. I have weight of lambs from small hothouse lambs here on the left, 40 to 60 pounders, to really large lambs, which in my case would be a little bit fat. And I have feed to gain of these lambs. You can see the very low feed to gain. That's because these in these 40 to 50 pound lambs, because these lambs are still drinking mom's milk. You can see, and they're very efficient. They don't need a lot. They're still gaining weight off mom's milk. So they become, they're still very efficient though right at weaning. Weaning in this case would be around 50 to 60 pounds. Because they're lean, they have very efficient gains. As they get much older, they're really poor efficiency. They'll get close to, I would say, maybe up to 10 pounds. So these are just estimates that I used to plug in this calculator. And I think they're reasonable estimates. Here's my price of grain, which is very expensive. I used a high price here. I can actually get a little cheaper price than this, but this would be realistic for a lot of people. So then what I've got here then from those estimates of feed to gain, I have collective cost of feed per lamb. And then in the next set of columns here, I have the cost of ewe production. So I have her feed over a year divided by the number of lambs sold per ewe per year, since it's an accelerated program. So the cost of ewe feed per lamb sold is about 64 bucks, pretty much for all of these. So that's another cost. So if I add together the ewe feed and the lamb feed, I get the total feed cost per lamb. So that's the cost of feeding the lamb plus the cost of maintaining her mom throughout the year. I look at different markets here. I have price per pound of lamb. You can see, of course, these hothouse lambs have these beautiful hot prices. They look really awesome. And so, you know, and then we get lower prices, but $1.60 for finished lambs is pretty much what we're getting now. We're actually getting higher prices now. In November, I was a little bit skeptical to go that high, but I think it was reasonable, realistic price. You can see that when you look at cost of production here, given the current market prices, which you can change and plug in here, we get, we quickly find that the amount of lamb that the money that we make corrected for feed costs suggest in this case that hothouse lambs are not going to be profitable at these prices, whereas these intermediate price weight lambs, these 60 to 90 pounders, are going to make us good money. And then again, these very heavy lambs are going to make a good amount of money. One thing that I didn't put into this calculation, because it's complex enough for you to look at, and I kind of apologize for that, is yardage costs and risk. When you consider you have to hold these lambs, these larger lambs, for a long period of time to get this weight on them. In the middle of winter, that's going to have a cost associated with this that I would say would negate the difference between these 80, 90 pound prices and those 80 to 90 pound prices, excuse me, 72 to 77 pound prices versus the 80 to 89 pound prices. These are probably going to be less profitable because the mortality rate is going to be slightly higher, and just the overhead cost of holding lambs and keeping my facility full is going to be a consideration as well. So anyhow, this just gives you some sense of the kind of thought process you need to go through to determine which of these markets to hit. And the take home here should be that unless these hothouse prices are super good, and you predict that your finished prices are going to be really low, you need to consider whether that's a market that you really want to enter. And you often find that some of these intermediate weight ranges, particularly as supported by the Muslim trade, can often be really good markets as well. I see a few comments here. Susan says you should charge the sheep operation for the hay you feed them. That's in the cost of the ewes. Okay. So in summary, ethnic markets are diverse and vary greatly in carcass specifications and seasonal demand. I think you see that. Market diversity and seasonal demand can be complementary, so that's why it kind of works really well in the some systems like the hothouse and Arab trade. It can mesh really efficiently with accelerated production. Marketing options can be evaluated with spreadsheets like I showed you. Hothouse production costs are really high and generally only profitable when targeted using an accelerated production system. The Muslim market standards are not as specific, but are almost always a more profitable target for low input pasture-based systems. And above all, good management is imperative for profit regardless of your system. So with that, I know I just pretty much used exactly the full time.